The drill noise stopped, not because they were done, but because the concrete they were pouring into my water tank had finally reached the brim. I was 20 feet away, frozen, holding a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, watching HOA enforcers laugh as they sealed the tank shut like they were burying treasure. Only it wasn't treasure in there. It was our entire community's drinking water. I could hear Walt's voice crackle through the walkie-talkie in my pocket. "They're doing it. Time to wake 'em up." And that was the moment. I pressed the button that made half their construction crew's radios scream with a high-frequency burst only encrypted gear should catch. Because you don't declare chemical war on a neighborhood of veterans, survivalists, and off-grid engineers and expect to walk away. What kind of HOA thinks it's a good idea to bury an entire neighborhood's water supply in concrete without realizing the whole block runs on a private intel network? It started with a letter, crisp, white, and smelling faintly of lavender, slipped into my mailbox with no stamp, no signature. Just the logo of the Bright Ridge Homeowners Association in a gray watermark across the top. The words looked benign enough. Notice of non-compliance. Parcel 214. But the moment I read the reason, I laughed out loud. Underground water storage unit disrupts visual harmony. Visual harmony. That's what they called my fully buried, code-compliant, county-permitted rainwater collection tank. Installed beneath my backyard chicken run, out of sight from any street or neighboring house. I'd built it years ago, back when Bright Ridge was still a quiet little collection of semi-rural homes, before the new board took over and started running the place like a gated gulag. The tank was my pride. 5 0-gallons of self-reliant security, filtered, sealed, and invisible, unless you were standing directly over the small valve hatch near the garden shed. I reread the letter, blinking in disbelief. The words weren't just wrong. They were weaponized. Disrupts visual harmony, it said again, as if the HOA's jurisdiction extended below the topsoil. I didn't even know how they found out it existed. That hatch was under a cedar planter box. My kids had painted sunflowers on it. Nobody outside my family had ever seen it. So I did what any rational adult would do. I walked to the HOA office, letter in hand, and asked for clarification. Their compliance coordinator was a woman named Darla. She wore horn-rimmed glasses, a pinched smile, and enough perfume to fumigate a barn. She looked up from her desk like I'd interrupted a sacred ritual. "Can I help you?" she asked, like I was a door-to-door preacher. "Yeah," I said, holding out the letter. "You sent me this, about a water tank that can't be seen from any angle unless you're part mole." She didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. She just turned to her computer, typed something, and said flatly, "That tank is not registered with the HOA." I frowned. "Registered? It's permitted by the county. I had an inspector sign off when it was installed. It's legal, safe, and it's underground. What exactly is it disrupting?" Darla clicked her tongue, printed out another sheet, and slid it across the desk. Per Article 3, Section 8C of the Bright Ridge Charter, all external modifications, above or below ground, must be reviewed and approved by the Architectural Integrity Subcommittee. Failure to do so constitutes a Tier 2 violation. I scanned the paper. It looked like something written by a lawyer who'd been locked in a room with a thesaurus and a bottle of wine. "It's buried," I repeated. "Completely invisible. It doesn't affect the look of anything." "But it exists," she said. "And that's the problem." That night I walked my backyard with a flashlight, checking every possible angle, wondering if I'd missed something. The valve was hidden, the tank buried. The only thing that even hinted at it was the subtle incline of the ground, like a small hill under the grass. If that was enough to trigger a violation, then every gopher mound in the county was at risk. The next morning, I got a fine in the mail, $150, due in 10 days, with an additional $50 late fee if unpaid. The following week, I got a second violation for non-standard shed paint color, which was baffling because I hadn't painted the shed in 3 years. It was forest green, same as when we moved in. I started to notice a pattern. Every conversation I had with the HOA turned into a citation. They were stacking them like bricks, building some imaginary case to prove I was unfit to live in my own home. When I requested a hearing, I was told the next board meeting was booked solid for the next 6 months. I wasn't invited to speak. I wasn't even allowed to attend unless formally summoned. So I dug deeper. I went down to the county registrar and requested every permit I'd filed in the past 10 years. I made copies. Then I asked for a list of the Bright Ridge HOA's recent citations, approvals, and fine schedules. The clerk gave me a look like I'd asked to borrow plutonium. "They're not required to share that," she said. "HOAs are private associations, not public bodies." "They're acting like a government," I said. "They just fined me for an invisible water tank." She sighed, nodded slowly, and then whispered, "You didn't hear this from me, but they've been fining a lot of people lately. And not just for code stuff. They fined a guy for putting in solar lights. Buried the complaint in a landscaping notice." My stomach twisted. It wasn't just me. I got back home and talked to Walt across the road, our unofficial neighborhood watchdog and former NSA signal analyst who now bred bees and brewed his own kombusta, half kombucha, half something that could dissolve a spark plug. He listened carefully as I explained the violations. Then he nodded once and said, "Check your Wi-Fi cameras. See if you've caught anyone poking around." I did, and what I found made my skin crawl. A motion alert from 3 nights ago. 2:14 a.m. The footage showed 2 figures walking along the edge of my yard. Flashlights off, moving with surgical slowness. They stopped near the shed, bent down, lifted the planter box, and shined a light into the hatch. Then one of them, short, squat, with a clipboard, jotted something down. I paused the video. The clip wasn't high res, but the outline was unmistakable. It was Jenkins, the HOA board vice president. And beside him was a younger guy I didn't recognize, dressed in all black with tactical boots. "That's how they knew," I muttered. "They'd trespassed. Walked onto my property at night without notice, without permission, without so much as a phone call." I was shaking. Not with fear, with fury. The next day, I installed a new gate lock, set up 4 more cameras, and called every neighbor I could trust. It started small. Me, Walt, Mrs. Connolly with the hummingbird feeders, and Brad, the vet who lived 2 streets over. Each of us had a story. Each of us had fines. Each of us had been told we were in violation of something vague, petty, or flat-out invented. And none of us had ever seen a single vote to approve those fines. Walt did what Walt does, dug into public record databases and old HOA meeting minutes. What he found was stunning. In the past 18 months, the board had convened 12 emergency executive sessions, during which they'd updated fine schedules, created new infractions, and authorized drone surveillance for aesthetic compliance. All without resident approval. All without public documentation. All signed off by Karen Liddell, the new HOA president with a fondness for power suits and phrases like strategic vision realignment. That weekend, we saw the first drone. It hovered over Brad's koi pond for almost 5 minutes, slow and steady like it was scanning for bombs. A week later, it circled Mrs. Koi. Connolly's backyard twice, then dropped low enough to trigger her sprinklers. I caught one near my garden, buzzing just above the tree line. Walt tracked its signal back to a portable uplink unit parked 2 blocks away, in an SUV with a magnetic HOA logo slapped on the door. That's when it hit me. This wasn't enforcement. This was surveillance. Harassment by technology. They weren't keeping the neighborhood clean. They were documenting dissent. I stood in my kitchen that night, staring at the hatch that led to my water tank, now covered in tarp and bungee cords like a crime scene. My daughter asked me, "Why are they mad about water, Dad?" I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a kid that grown adults in pastel polos can turn into tyrants when they get a taste of unchecked power? I looked at her and said, "Because they think they can tell everyone how to live, and because they don't like anyone who doesn't need them." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Kids are smart that way. As I tucked her in, I made a promise. They could find me. They could fly their drones. But they were never going to control my land. Not while I still had a voice, a spine, and a network of neighbors who weren't afraid to push back. That was the night I started printing copies of every document, every violation, every permit, every letter. I bought a binder and labeled it The File. And with each new page, my anger didn't grow louder. It got colder, focused. I didn't know what the HOA was planning next, but I knew one thing for certain. My water tank wasn't their problem. I was. It was supposed to be a regular Tuesday. I was in town picking up parts for the water filtration rebuild and grabbing groceries before the heat wave kicked in. I came home around 2:30 p.m., expecting to see the usual. Walt in his hammock, half asleep, with a thermos of kombusta, the Connolly wind chimes jingling like offbeat jazz, and my dog Rufus barking from the back porch like he was defending Fort Knox. But what I pulled into was silence. Not the peaceful kind, the eerie, wrong kind. My gate was ajar. The gravel in my driveway had fresh tire tracks that didn't match my treads. I got out slowly, senses flaring like I was back in Afghanistan. The front door was shut, but the lock had been reset, subtly repositioned like someone had twisted it with tools and then tried to make it look untouched. I opened the door, stepped in, and nearly slipped. Mud prints, boot prints, inside my house, on the hardwood floor I just refinished last spring. I followed them with my fists clenched and my heart like a ticking drum. The trail led to the kitchen, then the mudroom, then back outside. I circled around the side of the house and found the worst of it in the backyard. My chicken coop, my daughter's pride and joy, was wide open. The latch had been broken, clean off, hinges dangling like snapped arms. Spray painted across the back panel in slanted stenciled letters were the words Potential Vector Site, Unapproved Structure. Below that, an orange paper tag flapped in the breeze, signed in looping pen. OA Compliance Contractor. Site entry authorized. Next to the tag was a printed photo of my coop taped to the panel with the word evidence scrawled across it. I could barely breathe. I wasn't the only one. Walt came storming across the street, with a face like a hurricane in slow motion. "They hit you too?" he asked. "They didn't hit me," I said. "They invaded." He held up a garden trowel. "They walked through my bee yard. My bees are traumatized. That's 2 years of selective breeding. And they left a citation on my compost bin. Said it was an olfactory disturbance." I was about to respond when Mrs. Connolly came limping around the corner, her arm wrapped in gauze and her sun hat tilted at a wild angle. "They killed my squash," she said in a daze. "They trampled straight through the irrigation trench, flattened my basil, left a pink tag in the middle of my tomato patch like it was a murder scene." Her voice cracked. "And then they pepper sprayed Muffin." "What?" I snapped. "The dog?" "She barked at them," she said, eyes glistening. "That's all she did. Just barked. They said she was advancing in a hostile manner. She's 8 pounds, blind in one eye." I felt my whole body go rigid. This wasn't a violation. This was a raid. An ambush. No notice, no calls. Just boots, spray paint, and destruction. They came in like they had a warrant, like they owned the land. I pulled the footage from my security system and saw them. 2 men in tactical vests, no name tags, but each wearing an armband with the HOA's new Property Integrity Task Force logo, a shield with a fountain pen crossed over a measuring tape. They looked like contractors, not city employees, not law enforcement, just muscle, private and reckless. They were in my yard for 31 minutes, walked the perimeter, took photos of the tank hatch, opened the chicken coop, kicked the side panel, laughed when the chickens scattered. One of them cracked a soda and poured it into the feed bin to test for contamination risk. I called the HOA office. Darla didn't pick up. Nobody did. The voicemail was full. I drove there. Locked. A paper sign on the door. Closed for internal review. So I did what they clearly didn't expect. I organized. That night, 20 neighbors packed into my barn. Some I hadn't seen in months. Some I'd never even met. Everyone had a story. Becky from Hilltop Lane had her daughter's treehouse tagged as elevated surveillance risk. Jonah, 2 doors down, said they forced entry into his greenhouse and confiscated what they thought was an illegal grow-op. It was lavender, for soap making. Walt played us his scanner logs. He'd been recording HOA frequencies for weeks. The voice on the tape was sharp, clipped, too confident. Unit 4 to HQ. Backyard garden non-compliant. Marking for soft removal. Target appears agitated. Dog present, advise on chemical deterrent. That's what they said about Muffin, a blind Yorkie. I looked around the room. Anger. But not panic, not chaos. Resolve. We decided on the spot. We'd document everything, every interaction, every visit, every citation. We'd take turns monitoring the scanners, watching the gates, recording encounters. We made a neighborhood Dropbox folder. Walt designed a custom form. We named it The Archive. By the end of the week, there were 30 entries, 2 more dogs pepper sprayed, 1 backyard pond drained by mistake, a ceramic gnome shattered by someone's boot. Every event logged with time, place, and photo evidence. And here's where things got darker. We started seeing the same 2 men again and again. Black vests, same gear, always together. They weren't HOA board members. We couldn't find their names on the Bright Ridge directory. I ran their faces through reverse image searches. Nothing. One of the neighbors, Tomas, a retired sheriff, managed to snag a blurry photo of their vehicle. No plates, just a barcode sticker with the numbers 1738 BC. He traced it through a buddy in the DMV. It was a leased fleet vehicle registered to a shell company in a neighboring city, Everspec Field Management. Everspec's website listed residential enhancement enforcement, urban order solutions, and contracted compliance services as their offerings. No phone number, no staff photos. Just a vague list of buzzwords and a contact form that never responded. These weren't enforcers. These were mercenaries in polo shirts. I printed everything, added it to the file. We kept meeting. Once a week, sometimes more. Barn lights on. Lawn chairs set up like a war council. We coordinated camera installs, shared scanner updates, created burner emails to monitor HOA comms. Every time they cited one of us, we recorded it. And every time we pushed back, they doubled down. The fines grew faster, more aggressive. They started calling the rain tank environmentally hazardous. The shed became a potential shelter structure for unregistered fauna. My wind chimes were acoustic disturbances. But we didn't stop. We pressed harder. We wrote to the county, filed noise complaints against their drones, sent certified letters demanding cease and desist on unauthorized entry. And then something unexpected happened. The HOA responded not with a letter or a visit, but with silence. No more citations for a week, no patrols, no drones, nothing. It felt like a trap, like they were backing off to regroup. And then, right when we let our guard down, they hit us where it hurt most. They didn't come with boots, or paint, or pepper spray. They came with a backhoe, 2 unmarked trucks, and 30 bags of concrete. And they didn't knock. They didn't call. They didn't warn a soul. They just dug, right into my land. Right into the hatch. Right into the lifeline of a community that had stopped needing them a long time ago. It was a Thursday, hot enough to bake tar into the soles of your boots. The kind of day that made the sky feel heavy and too bright, like it was watching something wrong unfold. I'd only been gone 4 hours. Drove out past county lines to help my brother haul lumber for a barn addition. Came back with a 6-pack of cold brew and a sense of satisfaction that lasted exactly 32 seconds until I saw the machines. 2 trucks were parked half in the ditch near my pasture gate, their sides blank, tires grooved deep into the gravel like they'd been there a while. The backhoe was still running, its engine idling with the kind of mechanical guilt that always follows destruction. The smell hit first. Acrid, wet, unmistakably chemical. Concrete. I sprinted past the fence, across the trampled grass, and then I saw it. The hatch was gone. Not opened. Gone. Ripped up like it had been pried with a crowbar and tossed into the woods. A jagged hole gaped where the valve used to sit, and through it I saw slurry. Thick, gray, and rising. Concrete. Wet. Still curing. I dropped to my knees and stared in disbelief as the mix settled, slow and final, sealing off the one thing on this property that had been built to last. My water tank, 50 gallons of stored independence, now poisoned with industrial-grade concrete. The feed pipes had been sawed through. The filtration chamber was split open. Whoever had done this hadn't just sabotaged the tank, they'd crippled the system, surgically, intentionally. My brain flipped through rational possibilities, like flashcards, accident, city utility error, underground cable marking mistake, but none of them stuck. Because taped to the base of the tank was a plastic folder with an HOA letterhead, half melted from sun and chemical exposure. I pulled it free, hands shaking. The notice read, Emergency Utility Rectification, Parcel 214, Unauthorized Aquifer Manipulation, Mitigated per Section 9A. No signature, no contact number. Just a blank line for supervisor approval. And a timestamp, 9:42 a.m. I looked at my watch. It was 2:11 p.m. The concrete was barely 2 hours old. I walked backward in slow motion like my body didn't want to believe what my eyes were seeing. Walt showed up 3 minutes later. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at the hatch, looked at me, and said, I've got the radio logs. I didn't speak. Couldn't. The adrenaline hadn't hit yet. I was still locked in that cold space where disbelief lives, that numb quiet before rage kicks the door in. Walt pulled out his phone, scrolled, and played a clip. The voice was clipped. Smug, female. Karen. HOA president. Make sure they get that filled before 10. We don't want any backflow complications. And for God's sake, tell them to be discreet. Another voice, male, younger, uncertain, replied. The guy who signed the invoice used a different name. That's not going to bite us? Karen again. They're private contractors, not employees. Nobody can trace it. She laughed. Short, sharp. It's just water. He'll live. My fists clenched so tight my nails cut into my palm. It wasn't just water. That tank supplied my house, Walt's bunker, the Connolly's greenhouse, and the backup irrigation for 3 other neighbors. That tank was our off-grid backbone, our independence, our literal survival system in summer droughts like this one. I grabbed my phone and opened the Motion Alert app. Sure enough, the cameras caught the whole thing. 2 men in orange vests with hard hats and no identification tags, pulling up with a concrete mixer mounted on a skid truck, using bolt cutters on the garden gate, and walking straight to the hatch like they had a blueprint. One of them carried a clipboard. The other had a cordless drill and a saw. They worked fast, 37 minutes from breach to pour. They even placed a cone beside the pit like it was a public works project. One of them took a selfie next to the tank. I paused the video and zoomed in. His vest said Meridian Flow Logistics. I didn't recognize the company. Neither did Walt. So we did what we do. We dug. While I was on the phone with every neighbor affected, Walt was already hacking into open business directories. In 20 minutes, he found the contractor's license. It had been issued just 6 days earlier, under the name of Tanner Lowe, registered to a P.O. box 2 counties over. The business was listed as inactive. The number rang to a disconnected voicemail. It wasn't a company, it was a front. We checked the city permits, nothing filed. No work orders, no emergency utility notices, no soil disturbance logs. The county knew nothing. The city knew nothing. This wasn't public infrastructure. It was an ambush. Karen had hired someone off books, off records, off the cliff, insane, to destroy private water infrastructure under the false pretense of compliance. And she thought we wouldn't trace it. She thought we wouldn't fight back. She was wrong. By 5 p.m., the neighborhood was alive. Walt sent out the signal, an encrypted group pinged through our private mesh net. Every household on the network got the alert. Sabotage. Tank hit. Ops live. Within 15 minutes, my barn was full. Everyone who'd ever gotten a fine, a threat, a midnight citation, they were there. Phones out, faces pale, voices tight. Mrs. Connolly brought printouts of her bills. She'd already lost pressure in her irrigation line. The Sanchez family shower ran dry during their toddler's bath. The Callahan's backup tank, fed from my overflow valve, was completely empty. 4 homes impacted. 4 families without water. And Karen thought this was just backflow. I played them the audio. Every word. The laughter. The fake name. The phrase, just water. That was the moment the switch flipped. No more patience. No more warnings. Walt updated the ops board in the barn with a single phrase written in red chalk across the top. Content, document, expose. It was time. We activated the neighborhood comm system, a patchwork of encrypted handheld radios, old ham units, and Wi-Fi relays powered by solar trickle batteries. Each block had a call sign. Each house had a code name. Mine was Tankman. Walt was Echo Watch. The Connollys were Herbal Base. We divided the neighborhood into zones, assigned watch shifts, and began mapping HOA movements in real time. Drones were grounded via signal jammers Walt had built from parts of a busted microwave. Patrols were tracked, timed, and recorded. Every visit was filmed, every conversation transcribed. And every single violation was now countered with a certified affidavit. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were building a case. Because this wasn't just about concrete. This was about power. About control. About punishing anyone who dared to build something that made the HOA irrelevant. And Karen had just declared war. Not on one man. Not on one tank. But on an entire neighborhood of people who'd stopped being afraid. She wanted compliance. She was about to get resistance. Every legal channel. Every loophole. Every shadow in their own bylaws they'd never bothered to read. It was time to turn the lights on. And the first thing they were going to see was everything they'd tried to bury. We didn't sleep that night. The barn lights stayed on, casting long shadows over the dry pasture like we were back in a Cold War war room. Walt sat at the folding table with 3 laptops open, cables snaking into an improvised signal booster made from a repurposed satellite dish, an old propane tank, and what I later realized was the guts of a discarded baby monitor. "They're still chatting," he muttered, turning a frequency dial with surgeon's precision. Encrypted, but not smart. Old band radios with scrambled channels. Not even AES. Lazy. I handed him a mug of black coffee that tasted like burnt rebellion. "Can you break it?" I asked. He didn't look up. Already did. Just needed time. On the screen, lines of jagged text began to stabilize. What was once garbled nonsense now displayed as transcribed radio chatter, time-stamped, annotated, and deeply incriminating. HOA Field Ops 3, target blocks prepping for escalation. Recommending quiet pressure. HOA admin, negative, push until they fold. Non-compliant residents are loss columns. Make space. OA Finance. Liddell said investors want 4 more listings by quarter end. Tank Guy and Echo are priority obstructions. I felt my gut twist. This wasn't policy. This wasn't enforcement. This was clearing a field. Karen and her inner circle weren't just coming after aesthetics. They were executing a quiet purge. They wanted to replace people like me, Walt, and the Connollys with investor-aligned families. Ones who didn't ask questions, who liked their lawns the same color and their skies silent. People who paid the fines and shut up. They weren't fixing the neighborhood. They were flipping it. "She's repackaging Bright Ridge," Walt said grimly. "Turning it into a gated experiment. Curb appeal dictatorship. Short-term rentals, high rotation occupancy, and zero resistance." I nodded, pulse hammering behind my ribs. We need to get ahead of her. We spent the next 3 days building a counteroffensive, not with weapons, but with something more dangerous: information. Every neighbor with a router became a node. Every camera fed into our shared storage. We filed coordinated FOIA requests with the county for all HOA filings, development permits, utility easements, and water use disclosures. The trick was volume and timing. We didn't send one request. We sent 97. Individually crafted, individually filed. Simultaneously, they couldn't bury them. We mapped every incident. Every code enforcement. Every voluntary inspection. Walt built a heat map of violations by address and frequency. The pattern was obvious. The fines clustered tightly around homes with off-grid systems, edible gardens, old property lines, or multiple generations under one roof. Diversity was being purged under the banner of compliance. Next came surveillance. Walt launched his drones in shifts, modified quadcopters with silent rotors and thermal cams. We charted the HOA enforcer routes, logged their vehicle IDs, captured footage of them meeting in unlisted garages and side lots behind Karen's cul-de-sac. One clip showed Ray, one of the so-called contractors who helped pour concrete into my tank, slipping an envelope to a board member behind the tennis court shed. We cross-referenced his name through state contractor databases. No license, no tax ID, just a 6-month lease on a commercial P.O. box used by 3 other shell companies. "We're not just dealing with bad rules," I said, watching the footage loop. "We're dealing with bad people, running something bigger than a neighborhood." And then Karen struck back. A courier SUV, freshly washed and tinted, rolled through the neighborhood like a shark in slow motion. At each house, the same delivery: an envelope, hand-addressed, sealed with the HOA crest. Inside, a cease and desist letter. Identical language, identical threat. "You are hereby ordered to terminate any unauthorized documentation, recording, or dissemination of private HOA operations. Continued interference will result in fines, legal action, or suspension of residency privileges." Suspension of residency. The phrase echoed like a war drum. She was threatening to exile families from their own homes. The Connollys were livid. Brad offered to chain himself to his fig tree. Tomas brought out a laminated copy of the Bill of Rights and taped it to his front gate. Walt, calm as a frozen hurricane, just whispered. She blinked. "What do you mean?" I asked. "This isn't strength," he said. "This is fear. We rattled her. Now she's flailing." I scanned the room, filled with neighbors turned operatives. People who 2 months ago just wanted to garden in peace, grill burgers, watch kids ride bikes. Now, they were experts in municipal records, RF bandwidths, and bylaw cross-referencing. Karen had turned us into something she couldn't manage, a collective, a hive with memory. And the more she pushed, the more we tightened. We launched the exposure phase. Every document we collected, audio, video, memos, screenshots, was compiled into a master drive. Walt wrote a script that mirrored the files across 10 cloud backups, offline thumb drives, and a hidden NAS buried under his apiary. We called it The Vault. A neighbor's daughter, a grad student in digital media, created an interactive map of violations, overlaid with audio quotes from the decrypted radio logs. "Think of it as HOA meets true crime," she said with a grin. We drafted an anonymous tip package and mailed it to 3 local newsrooms, 2 county board supervisors, and 1 environmental justice nonprofit. Our cover letter was precise. This is not a feud. This is an organized campaign of residential displacement, funded by HOA misappropriation and executed by private contractors without oversight. By the end of the week, Karen was scrambling. She held an emergency HOA meeting, unannounced, unrecorded. Except it wasn't. Walt intercepted their live broadcast feed before they could encrypt it. We watched in real time from the barn as Karen stood at the front of a sterile meeting room, flanked by 2 board members with faces tight and nervous. "There is disinformation circulating," she said. "Certain residents are engaging in acts of subversion that endanger our neighborhood's integrity." She used phrases like bad actors, outside influence, and hostile interference. She never said our names. She didn't have to. One of the board members leaned over and whispered something into her ear. Karen nodded, and then said the line that sealed her fate. "It may be necessary," she said, "to reevaluate the suitability of some long-term residents who are no longer aligned with the community vision." We clipped that soundbite, time-stamped it, and shared it across the network. Re-evaluate the suitability of residents. The words went viral within our little digital uprising. Even neutral neighbors, the ones who had tried to stay out of it, started asking questions. One man said, "I moved here for peace, not a purge." Another woman, in tears, said, "They can't just make people vanish. This isn't a cult." The tide turned, but Karen wasn't done. The next day, Every house in our network got a second letter. A final notice. This time, the language wasn't vague. Any further attempt to disseminate internal HOA information will result in civil litigation, referral to local authorities, and immediate enforcement action under HOA Emergency Powers Code 10F. Emergency powers. That's what they were invoking now, like we were insurgents. Walt stared at the letter, then turned to me. "You ready?" "For what?" I asked. He pulled out a thumb drive from his boot. "To burn it all down. Legally, surgically, permanently." He plugged it into the master terminal. On the screen, pages of transcripts, financial irregularities, undeclared third-party contracts, and a PDF labeled Investor Pipeline, Karen Liddell. It showed future home flips, marked by current residents, flagged non-compliant. Every family on that list was someone we knew, someone who'd been fined, raided, or pushed. "She was selling us off," I whispered. "To developers. One garden, one tank, one citation at a time." Walt nodded. "And now? Now we expose the dealer." We didn't know it yet, but the fifth phase, the reckoning, had already begun. And Karen had no idea what was coming. The night before the courthouse filing, we held our final meeting in the barn. Windows covered, radios silent, phones in Faraday pouches, no cameras, no Wi-Fi. Just bodies, breath, and resolve. Walt had finished the last draft of the dossier, and the manila folder sat in the center of the table like a holy relic. Inside it, 312 pages of evidence. Audio transcripts of encrypted HOA radio chatter. Drone surveillance footage showing private contractors performing unauthorized demolitions. Financial documents tying Karen Liddell's office to a real estate holding company with ties to 3 board members. And at the top, a notarized affidavit from Mrs. Connolly's cousin, former head of the city's Environmental Compliance Bureau, confirming that the deliberate destruction of our rainwater collection system qualified as a Class 3 violation under the Clean Water Preservation Act. But that wasn't even the kill shot. The kill shot was the recording. A single sentence, clipped from Walt's decrypted logs, pulled from a conversation Karen had during the concrete pour. "We consider this a strategic removal." He made himself a liability, and liabilities are meant to be filled. It was cold, calculated, and damning. I hadn't slept in 72 hours. My hands shook when I held the folder. Not from fear. From weight. The weight of what it meant to go up against people who thought they were untouchable. That night, I called my cousin Ava, a federal water rights attorney who once sued a mining conglomerate into bankruptcy and now taught at Stanford Law. She answered on the first ring. "Is this about the HOA tank sabotage?" she asked before I even said hello. "Wait, you already know?" I stammered. She laughed, sharp and surgical. "Walt sent me the materials. This case isn't just winnable, it's a career ender, for them." The next morning, Ava flew in. Walked into my kitchen with a briefcase, a trench coat, and a war plan. By noon, we had filed a joint suit. Me, the Connollys, Walt, the Sanchez family, and 4 other neighbors, versus the Bright Ridge HOA, its president, vice president, and contracted operatives. The claims were comprehensive. Destruction of protected environmental infrastructure, trespassing, harassment, misuse of HOA funds, fraudulent citations, unauthorized data surveillance, and conspiracy to defraud residents for profit. But the big one, the anchor charge, was criminal sabotage of a shared resource. Ava wrapped the entire case around that. She cited state environmental statutes, federal water law, and an obscure Supreme Court precedent about the destruction of a community well in Nevada. Our tank wasn't just mine, she argued. It was a shared system, protected by cooperative maintenance laws. Its destruction didn't just affect property, it endangered people. She submitted the case with a motion for emergency injunction and temporary HOA suspension. The moment the judge read the motion, things changed. Fast. We didn't hear it from the court clerk. We heard it from the contractor. The same guy who poured the concrete into my tank called Walt, anonymously, through a scrambled VoIP line and said he'd been subpoenaed. "They're flipping on each other," Walt said. "We cracked the shell." By Tuesday, subpoenas had gone out to all board members. By Wednesday, the county court froze the HOA's funds and issued a cease operations order pending investigation. And by Thursday, the local news ran the headline we'd all been waiting for. Bright Ridge HOA under criminal investigation after alleged sabotage of resident water supply. The news crew parked outside Karen's house that evening. She didn't come out, but we saw the blinds move. We saw her silhouette pacing. The next day, we did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. We walked as a unit, 29 households. One after another, down to the county courthouse. We filled the lobby. We carried hard drives, affidavits, receipts, and printed letters. We shook hands with the court officers. We looked them in the eye and said, "We're not just here to complain, we're here to clean house." Ava handled the hearing like a surgeon with a scalpel. She tore through the defense's arguments. Karen's lawyer tried to say the tank was illegal, unregulated, unregistered. Ava dropped the county permits on the table like playing cards. Fully permitted, buried to code. And here's the signed inspection report from 2019, certified by your own municipal office. When they claimed it was a mistake, Ava played the audio. Karen's voice clear and smug. Strategic removal. The courtroom went silent. You could hear people breathe. The judge, a tall woman with a no-nonsense bun and a reputation for slamming gavel decisions like a guillotine, leaned forward and said, "That doesn't sound like a mistake." "That sounds like intent." Karen's face drained of color. The vice president looked like he might throw up. Ava closed with a kicker. She held up the map, the one we'd built with help from the grad student. This is a heat map of every citation issued by the Bright Ridge HOA in the past 12 months. Notice the clustering. It's not random. It's targeted. And here's the investor projection memo, obtained through public records, that shows how many of those targeted homes were scheduled for forced sale. She let that hang in the air for a beat. Then she said it slowly. They weren't enforcing rules. They were executing a displacement strategy. The judge took less than 10 minutes to rule. First, she granted a permanent injunction against the HOA's enforcement powers. Second, she froze their accounts pending full audit. Third, she referred Karen and the board to the county prosecutor for criminal review. And fourth, and this was the moment everything changed, she issued a dissolution order. Effective immediately, the Bright Ridge Homeowners Association was terminated as a legal entity. Its charter revoked, its authority void. Every resident in that courtroom stood in stunned silence. Then Mrs. Forty and Sound. Connolly started clapping. One by one, the others joined in. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was a quiet, reverent thunder, like a storm ending. Karen didn't speak, didn't look at us. She just stood there, pale and brittle, as the judge ordered restitution payments for all affected households, including a full city-funded rebuild of the destroyed tank. And then the final blow, when Ava leaned in and said, just loud enough for Karen to hear, "You destroyed the wrong thing. You thought it was about the water." It was never about the water. In the weeks that followed, change rippled outward like aftershocks. The contractor confessed in exchange for leniency and named the board members by detail. The investors Karen had courted publicly distanced themselves, calling the scheme unauthorized. Walt's map went viral online, picked up by local newspapers and housing watchdog blogs. The story became a case study in how neighborhood power could be weaponized and how grassroots resistance could dismantle it. We rebuilt the tank. City engineers helped this time. New piping, upgraded filtration, solar-powered pumps, and a locked control hub guarded by 2 cameras and a warning sign that read, "Property of the residents of Liberty Block." The day we poured the final seal, Walt held up a sign. Liberty Reservoir. And that's what we named it. The rebirth of a neighborhood. The monument to what happens when you take everything from people who've had enough. A few months later, Ava helped us draft a new charter, not an HOA. A neighborhood pact, voluntary, transparent, no fines, just cooperation, just decency. Just neighbors, free to live as they choose, water their gardens, raise chickens, and store the rain without fear. I still have the concrete chip from the old hatch, framed, next to the judge's ruling. And on some mornings, when the breeze is soft and the birds are loud, I walk to the tank, sit beside the valve, and sip coffee from a chipped mug that reads, "Compliant my ass." Because when you try to bury self-reliance in cement, all you do is prove how scared you are of people who don't need you. And when those people rise, they build something you'll never control again.